We are so excited to have Katie Arnold joining us today. Katie, welcome to Accessible.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Amelia.
Yeah, nice to have you.
It's so great. So, Katie, we usually just start these conversations off by getting a little background on you and how is it that you came to be in, the field of developmental disabilities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I consider myself to be an inclusive researcher and a disability advocate. I'm on faculty now at the University of Illinois at Chicago in their Department of Disability and Human Development. And I really got here. I didn't know there was a career in the disability field when I was growing up. And it was really growing up as a sibling. I have a sister who's 2 years younger, Patrice, who has an intellectual and developmental disability. And Patrice really shaped my worldview and influenced my career path in a big way. So it was from that I just saw, she was treated differently. She didn't, always have access to the same things that I had access to in terms of schooling and career path and that type of thing. So I started exploring in college, and there was no degree or clear pathway when I was going to the University of Chicago. But I found somebody who was a parent of a person with a disability who was really open to me doing some independent studies to learn more. I got involved in different volunteer activities with people with disabilities and started learning a lot. And then after I graduated from college, I learned about l'Arche. L'Arche is L'Arche, and it's a community where people with and without intellectual disabilities live together. There are l'Arche communities all over the world. And I had an experience, I think it was my junior year in college, going to a l'Arche community out in Tacoma, Washington for a summer, and just fell in love with the community and the philosophy and everything. And then when I was graduating, I learned there was a new community in Chicago, a l'Arche community that was developing. And so I went and lived at l'Arche Chicago and helped to found that community in the early days. I'm still very connected to that community and the people that are there. I consider almost like a second family to me. And then when I was living at l'Arche, because I would live there, with the other people with IDD, and we'd really create a home together based on our mutual relationships. That's where I learned about at the University of Illinois Chicago, there was a Department of Disability and Human Development, and I had never imagined there would be such a thing. So I started going to some of their workshops, and they had some luncheon talks, and got to know some people there. And then when there was an opening available, I first started out as an evaluation coordinator with Dr. Glenn Fujiera, and then I've just had great opportunities in my career to really grow and explore and learn about all different topics. And I ended up doing my master's in disability and human development and my doctorate in disability studies while working full time at UIC.
So going back to just when you were growing up, like when you think back on that, what were some of the values or core, beliefs that you developed being a sibling? How did that impact sort of your...
I feel like as a sister, I learned how to advocate at a young age. A lot of times people would have questions. My sister, Patrice's disability is not visible. Looking at her, you can't really tell until you start interacting with her. And then when she responds more slowly, she has a harder time articulating herself and processing information. People would be surprised a lot. And so I would be doing a lot of educating and advocating at a young age. And I also learned, my parents really taught me this notion of fairness, that fair is not everything being equal all the time. It's really about that everyone has different needs at different times in their lives. And it's all about getting those needs fulfilled when you have them. And so I really saw that, Patrice had a lot of medical needs and other things early on growing up. I'm the second oldest of five in my family. Patrice is the middle of all five of us. And so a lot of times when my parents were at doctor's appointments with Patrice, my older brother Keith and I would be kind of taking care of our younger two siblings. And so learned that responsibility early on. And so I think I gained a lot of valuable things from my sibling experience that has really served me well. And then I've also realized that there have been some things that, I've had to work on where I'm almost too much of a helper sometimes and don't always take into consideration my own needs or things like that I think are often common experiences that siblings have.
Yeah.
You mentioned UIC and sort of in your undergraduate experience, not necessarily knowing that there were careers in the disability field. You're also a professor at UIC, correct? What courses do you teach?
Yeah, I've taught a few different courses over the years. A number of years ago, I taught with Dale Mitchell a leadership in the nonprofit disability sector course. This was before I even completed my PhD there. And I also taught an undergrad class on disability activism that was really fun, just kind of teaching the undergrad students a lot of the history of disability advocacy and activism. More recently, I've taught a course for graduate students on interdisciplinary research, where they get to learn about all different types of research. A lot of it is bringing in guest lecturers, other faculty member or researchers within our department to really share the different approaches they have to research, the different methods that they use, so the grad students can learn from that. I guess lecture in a lot of classes. We have a family perspectives class, and I also am we have a LEND, which stands for Leadership Education and Neurodevelopmental Disabilities and other disabilities, and our LEND program, I'm the family faculty member, so I have the opportunity to really work with and mentor the trainees that come in who are family members as they go through the LEND program.
This podcast is actually a partnership with the Missouri LEND, and so I don't know. Let's talk a little bit about LEND. Like, what, as the family faculty member, like what?
Yeah.
And in fact, let me just go back and say the reason we're doing the whole family series is because all of our LEND trainees every year talk about how impactful their time with families is. And so I don't know, what do you see as sort of the benefits of a LEND?
Well, I think the LEND program is amazing. It's just this really great coming together of all of these disciplines to really learn and share from each other. And I have the opportunity to work with the family members who come in. So they typically don't have a traditional discipline like OT or PT or, a medical background. They're family members. And a lot of times these family members, have been out of school and taking classes for a long time. So this is a newer experience for them to get into that rhythm. And also they're hesitant that they don't have some of them don't have a degree that they feel is substantial enough. And so I really just encourage them that their lived experience is the value, and the other trainees in their cohort are going to learn a lot from them just by them sharing their own personal experiences along the way. And that really, is true, I believe. And I think the family members then really get a better sense of all of the different disciplines and the training and thinking. And, they've probably, many of these family members have interacted with people, in those disciplines in their personal lives, with their family member with disabilities. And so now to kind of have this interaction as a peer in a training cohort, I think is really a great experience for everyone involved.
Yeah, I think how important is it for families to have those interactions with professions that then support families later in the field, and then for those students as well. I think in other kind of realms that we do work in, there's less opportunity to bring families and those disciplines together. So the LEND program affords a really great opportunity.
Yeah.
Do you have a lot of sibling? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, we do have siblings that are part of the LEND, and I always love having the sibling perspective, because siblings really are kind of this sandwich generation where, many siblings kind of are at that juncture of navigating the aging system and the disability system, and really, providing support and care for their aging parents, and then having, maybe their own children, and then the extra layer of having a brother or sister with a disability. And just the longevity of the sibling relationship, I think, is so important for people to think about, yet siblings are often overlooked and sometimes even forgotten. So I think it's really wonderful when there's siblings that are involved in the LEND, and, everywhere.
I have a favorite poet of mine. Her name's Maggie Smith, and she recently was talking about siblings. They're the longest relationship of our lives oftentimes. And we think just so much about child and parent. And then if you choose to have a spouse later or a partner, you think about that relationship. But we often forget that our sibling relationship is probably one of the longest we'll have. And
right.
To give more attention to that, such an important part of our network,
Yeah. And, the sibling relationship, it ebbs and flows over time, often, from a young age. That's where siblings spend a lot of time, with each other, learning how to navigate the world, learning about relationships and friendships. It's often, people's first friend is, your sibling, and also first rival. And so, then there's often a point with adolescent I saw within my own family where, me and my other sibs went off to college or to careers, and my sister with an intellectual disability, Patrice, was left at home. And that was, it was easier for me as the older sister, but it was harder for our youngest sister when she was the last one to kind of leave the nest, so to speak. And then Patrice was kind of left behind. And then, as our parents are getting older, we're starting to think about what is that going to mean for us. They've been primarily doing a lot of the, primary care and support for Patrice, even though she's moved out into her own more supported living arrangement close to them. But they're not going to be around forever.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what is your relationship like in terms of do you provide caregiving supports? Is it just more, I don't know, less, more typical, or however you would say that?
Well, I'm a long distance sib because we live in different states. So as a result of that, I tend to provide a lot of emotional support, like through the phone or Zoom, just like connecting in that way. And Patrice provides emotional support to me as well. It's kind of that mutual where we connect and touch in. And then, in terms of financial support, my parents, are currently doing the bulk of that, but have been educating, especially me and my older brother, about, the future, what roles we might have in terms of supporting Patrice, both with her finances, and then getting more involved in navigating some of the other supports and services that she has. So we've started having, a number of years ago, my family started having these future planning meetings, really inspired by the work that I do with Dr. Tamar Heller around family future planning, where we've developed this curriculum called The Future Is Now to help families plan for the future. And then I have had the opportunity to kind of pull concepts from that to use within my own family, to really spur them to to plan for the future. And it's not easy. I mean, it's a difficult dialogue to really think about, what it's going to mean when our parents are no longer there, and really try to understand what does Patrice want, and, what will work for our whole family.
I'm curious, does that process of you using those tools then impact sort of the further development of the tools, or the way you recommend to others that they be used?
I think to some extent, yeah, my personal experience, just really having a better understanding of what it's like for, a family to use a curriculum, what really works, what practically, works within the constraints of families' busy lives. So yeah, I do think it's helped inform to some extent. We've also had families that we work with really inform, because I'm just one person with one perspective and family experience. So we've really looked at a range of family experiences and gotten feedback to incorporate and then improve the Future Is Now curriculum. And more recently, we've developed a virtual version, the Virtual Future Is Now, VFIN for short, where we're doing it on Zoom. And, for years, we tried to get funding to do this virtually, and we got rejected many times because they didn't think people with IDD could get online and interact in that way, and it would be too challenging. And then the pandemic hit and everyone went online, and people with IDD can and do get online and connect in that way very, effectively. And so that now we're doing it online. We got funding for it, and we're testing it out at this point. We've worked with a number of states and family cohorts. First, we pilot tested it. Now we're in the stage where we have an intervention group and a control group of families to really see how effective this new virtual version is. And the idea is that then eventually we'll roll it out, more broadly to reach more families.
Katie, what are some of the most important aspects of future planning for families, or maybe even just from the perspective of siblings? What are people finding really valuable about the curriculum and taking the course?
Yeah. Well, I think at the most basic level, in terms of future planning, it's really starting that difficult dialogue. I mean, that's just starting is really the hardest part for so many families. I saw that within my own family where, we would tiptoe around it, or we would push it to the side. But then once we sat down more formally and started talking about it, it really helped the momentum continue. So we were all able to kind of think about it more casually throughout our lives. And then when we come back together, just be more open about possibilities. We also had to learn how to include my sister Patrice effectively in the process. And that's one thing that I think this curriculum, The Future Is Now, does really well and is very unique because it specifically includes the adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities along with their family members. And for a lot of curriculums, they focus on just the parents getting the information and making the decisions. And that's what my own family was doing before we started formally sitting down and talking about and planning for the future. At our first meeting, I remember our parents saying, we've done it all. We've figured it out. We've, put together a special needs trust. We have some legal plans in place, and, this is what we've decided. And one of the things, my older brother and I were very surprised that they were going to put, kind of a big responsibility on us that we weren't informed about. My parents just thought, they know best. They're going to make the decisions. Granted, we were younger then, but now we're all part of the conversation, and especially my sister Patrice, and kind of we're learning what that new dynamic looks like. And it's good because I was worried about things that we weren't talking about. My other siblings were wondering and worrying. And now that we're talking about it, I think it really helps families have greater peace of mind, decreases stress and anxiety, and just has a lot of benefits.
Would you recommend that siblings, if there's multiple siblings, they take the course together?
Yeah, we recommend the whole family is welcome. We had one family where they had like 10 family members zooming in from all over the country, actually. Somebody was zooming in from college in a different state. They also had in their family room, like, the dad, the sister and her husband, and, the brother with intellectual disabilities, and then the sister's children, like all together. So what's really nice about this new virtual version is it's easier, especially for siblings who often live, further away sometimes, or have busy lives, that getting to a meeting location physically can be a little more challenging. So this virtual version really opens up the possibilities and the opportunities for more families to get involved, and especially for siblings to be included.
Yeah. So, Katie, I always think of you as one of the leaders in the sibling network. Can you just talk about that and what is the sibling network, and whether or not you're involved in it anymore?
Sure. Yeah. So the Sibling Leadership Network, SLN for short, we call it, is a national nonprofit for people who have a brother or sister with a disability. And we developed it. It was really just a group of people like myself and Dr. Tamar Heller, who would kind of bump into other people doing work around siblings at different conferences. And so it really organically developed in this way, where we saw a need, that there really wasn't a focus on siblings. There was no organization that was really, focused on siblings. So we decided to create this organization. And at first it was, real informal. And then we incorporated it as a nonprofit organization. I actually did that. It was a good learning process. And then I became the first part-time executive director. And I served in that role for 10 years. I concluded my time there in December of 2022. And there's an amazing new executive director, Caitlin McNamara, who is kind of leading the charge at this point. And the Sibling Leadership Network was really created to help siblings across the lifespan. We tend to draw the most members as siblings of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, though it's open to siblings of people with all types of disabilities. And, we even have siblings that their brother or sister passed away, and they feel once a sib, always a sib, and they're included and welcome to be part of our network. We provide information and resources, and also peer support, which is so important for siblings, because so many times siblings wait really long before they connect with another sibling. Right away when parents have a child with a disability, we try to connect them. And for people with disabilities, we have a lot of self-advocacy groups and other ways to get people with disabilities connected with their peers. But for siblings, we really didn't have that space. And so the Sibling Leadership Network has really helped create that. And there's chapters in 27 states now, with the vision that eventually every state will have its own chapter. And that's really where the more grassroots, the more personal contact happens at that state and local level.
Katie, you alluded to this earlier, but talking a little bit about the lifespan. So maybe through the SLN or through other resources, what are the unique needs of siblings, maybe from like the younger years to sort of that like middle adulthood to older adulthood, and how could like our LEND students even kind of keep in mind as they're doing a lot of like early diagnosis and early intervention, like what do young siblings need, especially to make that connection to the peer supports earlier on, so that way they're not waiting until middle and later adulthood to start getting engaged in peer supports and advocacy. And
yeah, that's a great question. I would say the number one thing is information, but geared towards the different life stages. So for young siblings, a lot of times they just need like basic, clear information about their sibling's disability, to be able to have language, because I know as a young sib, I was asked questions, by my peers, and I didn't always know what to say or how to explain, what was different about my sister. And so just having that language and that information, and then having peers, so the siblings don't feel so alone. And the Sibling Support Project is another great organization that is also part of the Sibling Leadership Network, but it's its own nonprofit that really focuses on younger siblings. And Sib Shops are a resource that is developed where young siblings can really get together to connect and just to have fun together and also talk about different strategies they've found to be effective. I got the opportunity to lead some Sib shops. I wish I knew about them when I was younger, because I think they would have been really helpful. But for one of the Sib shops that I was a part of, we do this activity called Dear Aunt Blabby, where there are these letters to a fictitious Aunt Blabby that are read that people can relate to. And so one of the letters was something like, Dear Aunt Blabby, whenever I go out, everybody always remembers my brother with a disability and nobody remembers me, signed the forgotten sibling. And I think that's a very common experience of many siblings where, their brother or sister with a disability gets the recognition and attention when they go out. People know their name, but not, the sibs' names. And I asked the kids, have you ever felt this way, after reading that fictitious letter? And everybody rose their hand. They all had, that common experience of always being like, the other sibling, the nameless sibling. And then one kid said, I have some ideas and strategies for that. And we were like, oh, please tell us. And he said, I've learned to tell some funny jokes. And that's how I stand out. And that's how people remember me. And then he went on to tell us some funny jokes. And, so he had kind of found his niche. But it was a great example of siblings really learning from each other at a young age. Then in adolescence, that's the stage where everything's embarrassing, right? And you just want to fit in. And so having a sibling that's different is challenging for many sibs to navigate. Sometimes people don't want to bring friends home to the house. Sometimes, they don't want to talk about it. They just kind of want their own space, and really trying to forge themselves apart from their family and their sibling. And then, there's often a time where siblings leave the house, go away, create their own identity, but still worry. I think there's a lot of worry that's part of the sibling experience. And then, later in life, it's really worrying about what's going to happen as our parents age, and what is my role in that, if anything. So that's a little bit of the life course trajectory for the sibling experience.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it's so interesting because when you said it earlier, just often in this field, we think about parents as the family, and we often forget to highlight the experience of siblings and think about what resources they need kind of from the get-go. And so I think it's great that there's some really neat things out there people can tap into.
Yeah. Well, Katie, so, given your position, with the Sibling Leadership Network, and now you're at UIC, where do you see our field going as it relates to siblings, and what kind of work, or what's going to be happening in the next 5 years or so?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. A hard question. I think for siblings, a lot of what siblings are learning, and I think the Sibling Leadership Network is helping, is how to forge our own path without stepping into our parents' shoes. Totally. I think the model, our parents are our model, and they're a great role model. But my sister doesn't want me to be her mother, and I don't want to be her mother. I want to maintain my sibling relationship. So how do we do that while also taking on some greater roles and responsibilities for support and care and advocacy that looks different than our parents, maintains our sibling relationship, and allows us all to kind of have our own lives, to some extent. So I think for many siblings, self-determination of people with disabilities is so important, because the more my sister is self-determined and the more she can make her own choices and decisions and live her own life, the more I can then live my own life as a sibling. So I think, that's a really important thing for siblings. I also think, within our sibling leadership network, there are many siblings who themselves have disabilities. And there's also a number of people that are involved that they are the person with a disability and they have siblings, and navigating that relationship. And so I think our field is learning how to have people with disabilities in the lead, and, really charting the course over the next 5 and more years for what we should be focusing on, what really matters. And I think that's something that for siblings and the whole disability field, really having more people with disabilities in leadership roles to really chart that course is so important.
Yeah. Great. Well, Katie, if anyone wants to learn more about your work or you, where can they go to find that information?
Yeah, you can check out the University of Illinois Chicago's website. There's some contact information for me on there. It's ahs.uic.edu. And then you can put in the Department of Disability and Human Development. I can give you a link as well.
We'll put it in the show notes.
And I encourage people, feel free to reach out if they want to email or contact me with more questions, or if they're looking for any specific resources, or if they want to know more about the work that I'm doing.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciated our time with you. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Katie.